My wife's ex-Marine brother was secretly beating my 9-year-old son during self-defense lessons and told him to keep it between men, so I pounced on him and turned him into a girl. My wife's brother Damon had been coming over every Saturday morning for 3 months to teach my son self-defense. Brody was 9 and small for his age, and 2 older boys at school kept shoving him around at recess. My wife Lacey told me her brother was the perfect solution. Damon was 34 and had done 2 years in the Marines before getting out on some kind of discharge nobody in the family ever talked about. He was 6'3" and built like a fridge, lifted 4 nights a week, and worked private security. The whole family treated him like a hero. My father-in-law Tucker called him the rock of the family. My mother-in-law Evelyn bragged about him at every dinner. Lacey worshipped her big brother and told me 100 times how lucky we were that Brody had a man like Damon in his corner. Damon told me not to watch the lessons. He said little boys needed space from their fathers when they were learning to be men. Lacey agreed. She said I had a tendency to coddle Brody, and that was exactly why we needed Damon. So I made myself useful somewhere else on Saturday mornings. I ran errands. I went to the hardware store. After the first 2 weeks, Brody stopped talking about the lessons. He came inside, got a glass of water, and went up to his room. He started asking me on Sunday nights if he could be homeschooled. He started asking me on Friday afternoons if we could move to a new town. When I brought it up to Lacey, she told me he was just maturing. She said Damon told her Brody was making real progress, and I shouldn't undo it by treating him like a baby. One Friday, I walked past the bathroom door and saw my son's back. Bruises from his shoulder blades down to his waist. Yellow and green and purple and almost black, in different stages, like a map of dates. Brody pulled his shirt on faster than I'd ever seen a kid move and told me it was from gym class. He wouldn't look at me. I went to the cooking area and asked Lacey about it. She didn't even pause from chopping onions. He's a boy. Boys get bruises. Damon says he's finally toughening up. This is exactly what we wanted. The next Saturday, I told Lacey I had to run to the hardware store at 9. I left at 8:45, parked 2 streets over, and walked back through the woods behind our property. There's a small window on the side of the garage. I crouched down and looked through. Damon was standing in the middle of the garage. Brody was in front of him in a t-shirt and gym shorts with his hands up by his face. Damon said, "Hands up. You drop your hands, you eat it." Then he stepped forward and hit my son in the stomach. Brody folded. Damon grabbed him by the shoulder and stood him back up. "Get up. Hands up." Again. Brody was crying. Damon hit him in the ribs. "You cry in front of those boys at school. They're gonna do this every day. Take it. Take it like a man." One more. He hit him a 3rd time. Brody dropped to one knee. Damon crouched down so his face was level with my son's, and I could see his lips moving. Calm. Almost gentle. The same voice you'd use to settle a spooked animal. My hand was on the side of the garage. My weight was forward. Every muscle in my back was telling me to go around to that door right then and take the man apart with my bare hands. I made myself let go. I made myself stay crouched at that window and watch, because I knew one wrong move would cost me my son. Damon stood over him and said, "Your dad doesn't know what it takes. Your mom doesn't either. That's why I'm here. You don't tell them what we do. This is between men. We clear?" I watched my 9-year-old son get hit 3 times by a man twice his size, and I didn't kick that door down. That was the hardest thing I've ever done. But I knew if I went in there swinging, Damon would spin it. He'd call it a misunderstanding. He'd say Brody was making it up. Lacey would believe him, because Lacey always believed him. I walked back to my car and sat behind the wheel and planned exactly how I was going to end Damon. That afternoon, after Damon was gone, I knocked on Brody's door. He was sitting on his bed with his arms around his knees. I told him I'd seen everything through the garage window. His face went white. The first thing out of his mouth wasn't about the pain or the hitting. It was, "Please don't tell Mom. She'll say I wasn't trying hard enough." That sentence hit me harder than anything I'd seen through that window. My 9-year-old son had just been beaten by a grown man, and his first thought was that his mother would blame him for it. He broke then. He told me Damon had started hitting him in the 3rd week. He told me when he cried, Damon said, "This is why you get bullied. Stop crying." When Brody said he wanted to stop, Damon told him, "You quit and I'll tell your mom you're a quitter. You want her to be ashamed of you?" And then he told me the worst part. Damon had told him that if he ever said a word to me, Damon would tell the whole family that I was too weak to raise a son, that I was the reason Brody was soft. Damon had used me as a weapon against my own kid. I asked Brody if I could see the bruises. He pulled his shirt off and let me count them. 7. 7 distinct marks in different stages of healing. Some fresh and dark purple from that morning. Some yellow-green, fading, from weeks ago. Ribs, back, shoulders, stomach. Each one a Saturday. Each one a lesson. Each one my brother-in-law's fist on a little boy's body while I was at the hardware store buying things I didn't need. I took out my phone and photographed every single mark, dated, time-stamped, with Brody's face visible in some of the shots, so there'd be no question who this was. He held still the whole time. He didn't complain. He didn't flinch. He just stood there and let me document it, and that quiet bravery made me want to break something. When I was done, I helped him pull his shirt back on, and I sat him down on the bed, and I looked him right in the face. "None of this is your fault. Not 1 second of it. There are no more Saturday lessons. Ever. I'm going to handle this." Brody asked me in a small voice, the kind I will hear in my head for the rest of my life, "Promise you won't let Uncle Damon come back?" I took his hand. It was so small in mine I could feel every bone. "He's never stepping foot in this house again." Brody nodded and leaned into me and put his head against my arm, and we just sat there on his bed for a while, and I let him feel safe for the first time in months. That night I called my best friend Enzo and told him everything. He told me to take it straight to the authorities. I told him I would, but first I needed to get out ahead of the family. Lacey worshipped Damon. If I went to the police first, she'd call him and he'd lawyer up before sundown. The whole family would close ranks and I'd be on the outside. I needed to break the mythology in one room, with no escape route. Monday night I tested Lacey. I told her calmly that we needed to pause the Saturday lessons because Brody wasn't doing well. She didn't even look up from her phone at first. Then she did, and her face was already hard. "Here we go again. Damon told me you'd try to pull this. He said you were jealous of his relationship with Brody." Jealous. That was the word she used. She told me Damon had said I'd never had a real male role model, and that's why I didn't understand what he was doing for our son. She said it like she was reading from a script, and that's when it clicked. Damon hadn't just been hitting my son behind closed doors. He'd been working on Lacey too. Not with fists, with words, feeding her lines for months, planting ideas, making her her see me as the problem so that when this exact moment came, when I finally pushed back, she'd have her answers ready. He'd turned my own wife into his first line of defense. I didn't argue. I just nodded and said I'd think about it. Tuesday afternoon, Evelyn called me. Her voice had that tone she used when she thought someone was making a big mistake. Lacey told me you're thinking about pulling Brody out of his lessons. Tucker and I both think that would be terrible. Damon is the best thing that's ever happened to that boy. I bit my tongue so hard I could taste metal. One conversation with Lacey on Monday night, and by Tuesday afternoon her mother was applying pressure, and her father's opinion had been passed down like a ruling from on high. The whole family had been activated. None of them had any idea what they were actually protecting. Wednesday I came home from work, and Damon's truck was parked in front of our house. He was sitting on my couch with a coffee in his hand like he owned the place. Brody was in the armchair across from him, stiff as a board, hands flat on his knees. Damon reached over and put his hand on Brody's shoulder and squeezed. Knuckles white. Brody flinched. Damon kept his hand there and looked at my son the way a dog owner looks at a dog he's training to be still. Brody, tell your dad how much you love our Saturday time together. Brody's voice came out like air leaking from a tire. I love it. I asked Damon if we could talk outside. On the porch he stood with his back to the railing, 5 inches and 70 pounds bigger than me, arms crossed over his chest. Listen, I know what you think you know, but you don't know what it takes to make a boy into a man. I've been in combat. I've trained soldiers. You sit behind a desk. So here's what's going to happen. The lessons continue. Brody is going to be fine, and you're going to stop making Lacey worry about nothing. He said it like he was reading me terms and conditions. I looked up at him and held his eyes and said, quiet and calm. Saturday is the last lesson, right? He thought I was backing down. He grinned. That's right. 9 sharp. I nodded. Wouldn't miss it. He clapped me on the arm and walked back inside to say goodbye to Lacey. He ruffled Brody's hair on the way out. Brody didn't move. Thursday almost ended everything. I'd left my phone unlocked on the counter while I was in the shower. When I came downstairs, Lacey was holding it, just holding it, staring at the screen with this expression like every muscle in her face was being held in place by something she hadn't figured out yet. Why do you have photos of our son's bruises? My whole body clenched. The plan was Sunday. The plan was everyone in one room with no escape. And now my wife was standing in our cooking area, holding the evidence like a grenade with the pin halfway out. I made a decision in 3 seconds. I couldn't lie. Because those bruises aren't from gym class, Lacey. They're from your brother. She shook her head before I even finished. That's insane. Damon would never hurt Brody. You're making something out of nothing because you've always been intimidated by him. I told her what I'd seen through the garage window. 3 hits. The exact words Damon had used. She set the phone down on the counter but kept one hand on it like she was guarding it. You spied on my brother? Her first concern was Damon's privacy, not Brody's body. I made her scroll through every photo. 7 bruises on our son. She looked at each one. On the 3rd photo, her thumb stopped moving for a second. On the 5th, her mouth opened and closed without sound. On the 6th, she swallowed and her throat clicked. By the 7th, her eyes were glassy and her jaw was set, and I thought for 1 second that I had her, that I had finally given her something her brother couldn't talk his way around. Then she pulled her shoulders back the way Damon pulled his shoulders back, the exact same motion, like she'd learned it from him, and she said, he's teaching him to be tough. That's exactly what Damon told me he was going to do. You just don't understand because you've never been in a real fight in your life. Something broke inside me when she said that, not like glass breaking, more like a rope that had been holding something up for years finally snapping. Then she said the thing that explained everything. You don't know what Damon went through as a kid. You don't know what our dad put him through. Damon survived it, and it made him the strongest person I know. He's doing the same thing for Brody because he loves him. Tucker, her dad, the man who sat at the head of the table every Sunday and called Damon the Rock. He'd done this to Damon when Damon was a boy. The same thing, maybe worse. And this family didn't call it abuse. They called it parenting. They called it love. They called it the thing that made Damon. Now Damon was doing it to my son, and in their minds, he was passing down a gift. Lacey threatened to leave and take Brody if I brought this up at Sunday dinner. I nodded slowly, like I was thinking it over, like maybe she had a point. She watched my face and her shoulders relaxed. She thought she'd won. She picked up her glass and walked out of the cooking area toward the living room. I stood there alone. Lacey didn't know it yet, but she'd actually made my plan stronger. Now I knew exactly what every single one of them would say on Sunday, and I was ready for it. Friday and Saturday, I prepared quietly. I printed every photo of every bruise on letter-sized paper, in color, with the timestamp embedded in the corner. 7 sheets. I had Brody write down, in his own handwriting, 3 sentences about what happened in the garage on Saturdays. I had a pediatrician friend look at the photos and write a 1-page letter confirming the bruising pattern was consistent with repeated strikes from an adult fist over a multi-month period. I put it all in a manila envelope, the envelope in a folder, the folder in my work bag. I called Kathy, my old mentor, and told her tomorrow was the day. She told me to file the report first thing Monday morning and back the evidence up in 2 places. She told me, protect your son first. Everything else is noise. Enzo agreed to wait in his truck outside Tucker and Evelyn's house. When I texted him, he'd come in. Sunday morning, Lacey wouldn't talk to me in the car. She just stared at the windshield and said, halfway there, flat and hard, like she'd been rehearsing all morning. Whatever you're thinking about doing today, don't. This family is everything to me. Don't you dare ruin it. I looked at Brody in the rear view. He was buckled in, staring out the window, his face blank, looking so small in that seat. I said, I'm not the one who ruined anything. We drove the rest of the way in silence. When we pulled up, Damon was already in the front yard with Tucker, both of them laughing about something. Damon in a tight shirt that hugged every muscle like he'd picked it specifically to remind everyone in the room what he was made of. He waved at me with that easy grin. Hey brother, missed you yesterday. He looked at Brody, who was climbing out of the back seat with his head down. Brody, come give your uncle a hug. Brody froze. 1 foot on the driveway, 1 still in the car, like he'd hit a wall nobody else could see. Then he reached out and grabbed my hand and squeezed so tight his fingernails dug into my palm. I leaned down so only he could hear me and said, stay close, it's almost over. We walked inside. Lacey went to the cooking area to help her mother. Damon dropped into his usual chair at the table like he owned the room. I sat Brody down next to me and put my hand on his back, and I felt him lean into me just a little. Under the table, I pulled out out my phone and texted Enzo one letter, K. Then I reached into my work bag, pulled out the manila envelope, and stood up. The conversation didn't stop right away. Damon was mid-sentence about a guy at his gym. Tucker noticed me first. Then Damon, his grin already spreading wider, like I was about to share some cute story about Brody throwing a punch. I cleared my throat and said, loud enough that Evelyn could hear me from the cooking area, before we eat, I want to show everyone something. Something important about what Brody's been learning on Saturdays. Damon leaned back in his chair, easy and confident. Sure, let's hear it. Tucker set down his fork. Evelyn came in from the doorway and clasped her hands together in front of her chest, like she was about to watch a recital. I opened the envelope. I laid the first photo on the table in front of Tucker. A close-up of the dark purple bruise on Brody's ribs, taken Saturday, time-stamped in the corner. Tucker's smile evaporated. I laid the second photo down, the yellow-green one on his back, 3 weeks old. Then the third. Tucker's hand went up to his mouth and stayed there. The fourth, the fifth. Evelyn took a half-step backward into the doorframe like the wall behind her was the only thing holding her up. The sixth, the seventh. One by one, in date order, the whole map of my son's body across 3 months. 7 sheets of paper covering the dinner table. Evelyn made a sound from the cooking area doorway that wasn't a word. I laid Brody's handwritten statement next to the photos. Then the pediatrician's letter. The whole table was covered. Damon hadn't moved. His grin was gone. Tucker was staring at the photos with his mouth open. Evelyn had both hands pressed over her face. I said, quiet and steady. 7 bruises. 3 months. Every Saturday. Brody asked me if we could move to a new town. He asked me if he could be homeschooled. He flinches when anyone raises a hand near him. He was told to keep it secret. He was told his own parents wouldn't understand. I paused and looked at every face in the room. That's not training. That's not toughening up. That's a grown man beating a little boy and scaring him into silence. Damon stood up so fast his chair shot back behind him and hit the wall with a bang. That's taken out of context. I was training him. That's how you train someone. He pointed at the photos and looked at Tucker. That's how Dad trained me. Tell them, Dad. Tell them that's how you toughen me up. It worked, didn't it? Look at me. He held his arms out wide like he was presenting himself as evidence. 6'3", 240 pounds. Ex-Marine. The rock of the family. Look at what this made. Tucker didn't look up from the photos. Evelyn's whisper cut the room sharper than any shout. Damon, he's 9. Damon's face cracked open into something raw and ugly and hurt. His voice broke. I was 8 when Dad started. 8. And nobody felt sorry for me. Nobody took photos. Nobody called it abuse. They called it parenting. And it made me who I am. Lacey was frozen in the cooking area doorway. I turned to her. I showed you these photos on Thursday. You watched me say where they came from. And you told me I didn't understand because I'd never been in a real fight. I kept my voice even. No shouting. You defended this. Her face crumbled. Not cracked. Crumbled. Like a wall that had been holding back water for years, finally giving way all at once. The front door opened and Enzo walked in, calm and steady, and stood next to me. He looked around the room and said, I've watched all of you put Damon on a pedestal while a 9-year-old boy was getting hurt behind a closed garage door. This stops today. Damon took a step toward me, using every inch of his height. You want to do this? You want to come at me? You're half my size. I didn't step back. I didn't flinch. I looked up at him, and I felt nothing. I'm not going to fight you, Damon. I filed a report. I've talked to a lawyer. I have the photos, the testimony, and a doctor's letter. You're done teaching anyone anything. If you ever come near my son again, there won't be a conversation. There'll be a courtroom. Damon's face went white. The color drained out of him like someone pulled a plug. He looked at Lacey, the one person who had always been in his corner. But Lacey wasn't looking at him. She was looking at Brody. I felt it before I saw it. Small hands grabbing the back of my shirt, both fists gripping the fabric tight. Brody had gotten out of his chair and come to stand behind me, his face buried between my shoulder blades, shaking. And Lacey was staring at the way her son was hiding from her brother, from the room, from her, maybe seeing it for the first time. Tucker's voice came from the head of the table, raw and low, dragged up from somewhere deep. Sit down, Damon. Damon turned to his father with the look of a man who had built his whole life on a foundation and just felt it crack under his feet. Dad, I was doing what you did to me. Tucker's chin trembled. His hands shook flat on the table. He didn't look at Damon for a long time. Then he did. And when he spoke, his voice was so quiet you almost had to lean in to hear it. I know. And I was wrong too. Damon's legs gave out. There's no other way to describe it. 1 second he was standing there, 6'3" and 240 pounds of muscle and marine training and family mythology. And the next second he just folded into the nearest chair and his shoulders dropped and his hands fell between his knees and he started to cry. The biggest man in the room, the rock of the family, the hero, crying in a chair like a kid who'd just gotten the wind knocked out of him. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound was Evelyn's quiet sobbing from the doorway. I reached behind me and found Brody's hands and gently pulled them from the back of my shirt and turned around. He looked up at me with red eyes and a wet face, and I picked him up. He wrapped his arms around my neck and his legs around my waist and held on like I was the only solid thing left. I carried him toward the door. Enzo fell in behind me without a word. As I walked past the table, past the 7 photos and the doctor's letter and my son's handwriting, I heard Damon's voice behind me. A voice I had never heard from him. Not the big confident voice, not the low threatening voice. Something small, something broken, something that sounded like it came from a boy much younger than 34. I thought I was helping him. I didn't turn around. I walked out the front door with my son in my arms. About 5 minutes into the drive, my phone buzzed in the cup holder. A text from Lacey. 3 words. I'm so sorry. I looked in the rear view. Brody was asleep. His hands were open.